Good evening, dear students. Thank you very much for joining the class. All right, so it's joining. Fantastic. Everybody's here. So live in YouTube. Give me a second. Here we are. Okay. Let us start. Thank you very much, dear students, for joining me. As I told you, today we're going to have classes until 9:10. Okay, in order to compensate the 10 minutes that it was just 5 minutes actually, right? That we lost because we always have 5 minutes of tolerance. Nonetheless, I just had to respond to some questions that my other group had. So it was a little bit difficult to arrive at 9 or at 8:05. Nonetheless, as I mentioned, today we're going to compensate and we're going to have some extra minutes of classes so you can get the entire hour of material and practice in this case. Because today, if you pay attention to yesterday's class, we are going to practice everything we have learned. But nonetheless, before we do that, let me explain just well, actually, no, we're gonna practice because as I told you today, we have to finalize with the theoretical aspects that we have learned yesterday. Okay, so let us go and let us get into the practice. Okay, so let me share my screen with you, dear students, in order for us to go and have this class very well utilized. That is to say, by practicing. So let me close this. Fantastic. So let me right here advance. So let me explain how are we going to practice tonight. All right. The way that we're going to practice is that first of all, I'm going to access to our simulator and I'm going to be reproducing some lectures and some conversations. And all of us, we're going to listen, okay, to these conversations. And we need to take notes, of course, on the information we receive in the lecture or in the conversation. After we listen to the conversation or lecture that, well, if you remember yesterday's class, are the only materials that we can receive in the listening section, lectures or conversations. What we are going to do is that after we finalize listening to the lecture and after we listen to the conversation, you are going to respond to these questions one by one. That is to say, I'm going to choose one of you aleatorily, all right, randomly, and you're going to have 1 minute in order to read and respond the question. But now, that doesn't mean that the rest of you, dear students, when one of your classmates is chosen in order for him to deliver the response publicly, it doesn't mean that you don't need to respond. What you should do is to take a sheet of paper, a notebook, and to write all your responses on that paper so that at the end, when we check out the correct responses, you can compare what you chose with the correct answers, okay? So as I say, one of you is gonna be delivering the response publicly, what he considered to be the correct response. Nonetheless, all of you need to always write down on your paper, what do you think is the correct response for that particular question, okay? So please, now, let us all listen to this lecture or conversation. Take your notes, okay? As we have learned, practice all the recommendations that I have given you, and then we are going to respond to questions one by one with, as I said, 1 minute for you to respond and read the question, okay? So let us start now.
Listen to part of a lecture in a world history class.
Most of you had lunch right before this class, didn't you? Well, I did too. I kept my lunch pretty simple. A sandwich, a cola, and some fruit. And I got to thinking how convenient food is for all of us. We don't have to catch our food or find it. Sometimes we don't even have to prepare it. We can just buy it. But things weren't always that way. In very ancient times, everyone got their food, well, most of their food, from hunting wild animals and gathering fruits and vegetables that grew naturally. As you probably noticed, hunting and gathering is not the main way most people get their food these days. Instead, we get almost everything we eat from grocery stores, right? And the food you find in the grocery store, or sometimes the ingredients in the food, originally come from farms. But how did farming start? What archaeologists have found is that the origins of agriculture are scattered across the globe. We see evidence of early farming all around the world, starting about 15,000 years ago during the Neolithic Age, the time period when humans first began to use tools, create art, that sort of thing, started to act more like modern humans. So, earlier in the Neolithic, we see signs of agriculture, but only the farming of plants. We see the first signs that plants were actually cultivated, deliberately grown and bred to be different from wild plants. We can tell that the plants were cultivated because they produced more food, better food for human populations, than their wild predecessors. The grain plants yielded more grain. The fruit trees grew bigger fruits, and the seeds more closely resembled the seeds of modern domestic plants. You see, even hunter-gatherers would sometimes care for wild plants, water a tree, or grow berry bushes. But real agriculture started when humans began to grow their own plants, deliberately breeding them to be different from wild ones. And in the early to mid-Neolithic, we see this kind of behavior popping up in a lot of different places. Cultivated rice in Central Asia, selectively bred squash in Mesoamerica, figs and grain in the Middle East. But that was just plants. You see, mainly plants. The other key part of human agriculture, large-scale farming of animals, didn't come till later. Oh, sure, there was some limited domestication earlier in the Neolithic, some taming of dogs, sheep, goats. But this was a very minor aspect of farming at first. As agriculture continued into the late Neolithic, we saw farm animals take center stage alongside plants. Humans started breeding the smaller animals, the dogs, sheep, goats, more than ever. And the animals became more different from wild animals than before. Sheep began to grow more wool for farmers' clothing. Goats were bred to give more milk and give to produce more meat. Farm dogs began to have the instinct to herd animals, not hunt them the way wild dogs would. Remember, this is one of the first signs of true agriculture. Selectively cultivating plants and selectively breeding animals. Animals began to become very important. Humans even began to develop pastoral communities, groups of people who all worked together to tend animals for food. With more people working together to manage farm animals, there was an especially noticeable rise in two types of animals that can be a lot of work: cows and pigs. Beef, pork, dairy. The stuff lots of farms all over the world still churn out today. This is where farming really came together, with pastoral communities. Farming as a whole started to take on the basic features of modern agriculture. People began to organize communities around farming and around systems that distributed the farmed food, gave the food to everyone in the community. These were small settlements at first, but soon pastoral communities turned into something far bigger. Agricultural civilization, based on the farming of both animals and plants, started happening on a large scale. We started to see lots of states with governments and modern social organization based on agricultural food production. There were rulers who made the laws about how and where the food was grown and how it was distributed. There were various specialists to grow food, store food, prepare food, manage animals or plants, make farming tools, build roads and buildings, and so on. People finally began organizing into complex societies like the ones we have today.
All right, fantastic. As I was mentioning, okay, so now we have finalized with the lecture. Let us get into the questions, okay, for this particular lecture. Now, this will be the first question, and the student who's going to help me with this one, all right, is going to be Jorge. Okay, Jorge, you're the first one that I can see on my screen, so please are going to start with the, let's say, public responses round, and the next one is going to be Sergio, okay? So this question, Jorge, you have to read it. You're going to have 1 minute and you have to respond it. And when your minute is over, you have to say it aloud, okay? Nonetheless, if you want to respond the question before your minute is over, you can also do it, okay? You don't need to utilize the entireness of your 1 minute, okay? By the way, this is going to be our chronometer, all right? And this chronometer is always going to be, well, sounding or emitting a sound when the minute is over. Okay, so when you listen to this, you know that you don't have more time, and I'm going to ask you to say the response. Okay, but if you want to say it before the time is over, you can also do it. It is up to you. Right? Fantastic. So please, Jorge, and for all of you, start reading and responding the question now.
It's option C.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, dear Jorge. There you are. So let's go to the next one. Sergio, this is going to be for you. Let us restart the chronometer. So please start reading and responding now. All of you, anyways, take your sheet of paper and write what you think is the correct response, okay? All right, fantastic. Sergio, which one would be the correct response here? Can you listen to me, Sergio? Are you there? Okay, I guess Sergio has some technical problems. Lucia, please, could you help me with this one?
Sure. I think that maybe we didn't know which stage you has to answer, but for me, it's the first answer, the first choice.
All right, first choice. Fantastic. Thank you very much. There you are. Next question. Yeah, the correct answers are going to be revealed at the end. Okay, so we're going to have some feedback later. Don't worry. All right. Fantastic. Let's go to the third question. According to the professor, okay, so here you have another one. So please, Fabiana, this is yours. All right. So please start reading and responding now. There you are, Fabiana.
Yes, I think it's D.
All right. Okay, so and the second one, in this case, notice that it says choose two answers. So in this case, you will have to choose two different answers.
D and C.
All right, G and C. Fantastic. Thank you very much. There you are. So next one is going to be for Sergio Nogales. All right. So please start reading now. There you are. Sergio Nogales, please, could you help me with this one? Okay, Sergio, can you listen to me? All right, fine. My older Sergio, the one that just says Sergio. No, fantastic. Yes, dear Sergio, how are you? Which one?
A, the first.
All right, the first one. Thank you very much, dear Sergio. Fantastic. This one is going to be for Raisa. All right, so Raisa, this is a purpose question. Therefore, you're going to be listening to a portion of the recording again. So please let us all listen together.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
What archaeologists have found is that the origins of agriculture are scattered across the globe.
What is the professor implying about the way agriculture began?
Right? So, Raisa, please start reading and responding now. Raisa, please, your correct response.
Okay, D.
Right, D.
B.
Thank you very much. Yes, okay, fantastic. Thank you. There you are. Okay, let's go with the last question for this one. Okay, again, we're going to listen to portion. This is going to be for Camila. Okay, so Camila, please pay attention to this one, especially. Let's go.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
There were various specialists to grow food, store food, prepare food, manage animals or plants, make farming tools, build roads and buildings, and so on. People finally began organizing into complex societies like the ones we have today.
Why does the professor say this?
People finally began organizing into complex societies like the ones we have today.
There you are. So Camila, please start reading and responding now. There you are. Camila, please, your correct response here.
I think it's B.
All right, B, fantastic. All right, there you are. So now let us check out the responses you have given and let's see if they were correct, okay? And let us give some feedback. Okay, let's come back to the first question. Here we are, fantastic. So the first question was, what is the main focus of the lecture? And the correct response here was the number 3, the history of agriculture from its origins to the beginning of modern civilization. I think it was very clear, right? Because remind when I told you yesterday that the way to identify and respond this type of question is always asking yourself, okay, what is that idea that frames that all discussion and data and makes all the lecture I have listened to a unity? What makes it a whole and not just separate and unconnected information? And I think that it is very clear that during the entire lecture, the professor is discussing, right, how so that agriculture was born and how so that brought us to the to the current situation of human civilization, right? So I think this is very clear. Fantastic. Very good. Number 2. What can be inferred about the relationship between agriculture and hunting and gathering? Okay, so in this case, the correct response was agriculture has more relevance to modern food sources than does hunting and gathering. So what about, for example, the first one? Agriculture became more common than hunting and gathering during the Neolithic age. Well, I mean, as I told you, I think at the well, when we were discussing this question in class, it's not very much necessary to pay attention, for example, to terminology that is very specific, because when the professor here discusses some periods in human history, the Neolithic, and there are actually other periods of human history that he mentions, you shouldn't pay too much attention to that. And especially because in this type of questions, they don't usually ask you about those type of details because they know it's very difficult for you to recognize it and to memorize them. So as you can see in this case, the correct response is not this one, because actually the professor said that hunting and gathering were disappearing on the Neolithic age, if you pay attention to this one. But you were not actually required to know this because, as I say, to pay attention to these two specific details is not actually necessary. But the lecturer said that these activities disappeared on this particular time and that agriculture began to be the dominant activity of human production during the Neolithic age, all right? So the second one, agriculture has more relevance to modern food sources than does hunting and gathering. This is the correct answer, and you know why? Because you have a justification in the lecture in order to infer this. And what is that justification? Remember that in order to respond these questions correctly, you always need to have a textual justification that gives you the authority to say, well, I can infer this logic. And well, the correct response here would be this one, because at the end of the passage, the professor expresses, right? As you can see, agriculture has shaped human civilization and has made it what it is today. So it is, I think, because of that information, possible to infer that it has more relevance to modern food sources than does hunting and gathering, because hunting and gathering have not influenced human life as it is nowadays as agriculture has done it. Hunting and gathering does not provide as much food as agriculture. This is something that if you think about it, there is no a single sentence in the lecture that talks about this quantity of wealth or quantity of goods. Maybe you can think that this is logical. Yes, it is logical. But remember that in this case, in order to respond these type of questions, you don't need to think about external things. You don't need to use external information you may be aware of. But your only criteria must be the information that ETS has given you. And in the lecture, they didn't say nor mention anything about quantity of food that was produced with agriculture and also with gathering and hunting. Okay, so this was not the correct answer, and the same with the fourth one. What about the third option? According to the professor, what is true about the domestication of animals? And in this case, the correct answers were the fourth and the third one. I think that you got it pretty well here. Domestication causes animals to be more useful for farming purposes. He mentioned this, right? That dogs were actually not used to just herd animals, but to hunt them, to eat them. But because of domestication, they learned that their correct function with humans was just to protect humans and not to eat animals. And for early domestication in both dogs, sheep, and goats, this was actually also mentioned, right? That these were the first animal that were always trained and that were, well, included in domestication. Okay, what about this one? According to the lecture, what is true about ancient pastoral communities? Well, the second answer was the correct one. Community members all work together to raise animals that produce food. And well, if you think about the first response, your students, this is not the correct answer because domestication of animals was limited in these communities. In the reading passage, sorry, not reading, in the lecture, we are never set that there was some sort of boundary or limit for these communities. But the only thing that we're informed of is that community members worked together in order to create food that was later distributed between the members of the community or among the members of the community. Therefore, I think that, as I say, you have to pay attention to what the lecturer says. And indeed, maybe you can think these communities surely had their limitations in their production, but that is not set in the lecture. You need to always care about what the lecture says, not what you think is logical just because it is logical. You need to always have a justification, okay, in the lecture. And the lecture talked about how was it that all these members collaborated in order to produce and later to distribute that production. But the lecture never mentioned domestication in limited levels. No, it never talked about that. The same with the third option. They are similar to modern pastoral communities. A comparison is never made, therefore not correct, okay? Fifth one, listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question. So what is the professor implying about the way agriculture began? The first efforts at farming happened in many different parts of the world. And this is true because remember the sentence. Let's listen to it again.
The professor implying about the way agriculture
Scattered across culture are scattered origins of agriculture is that the origins of agriculture are scattered across the globe.
Right? I think the sentence is very clear, right? Across the world, they're scattered across the world. It means that the first efforts at farming happen in many different parts of the world, right? I think it's super clear. It's not necessary to explain why this is the correct answer. The final question. Listen again to this part. Oh, sorry.
Listen again.
Great.
Again to part of the lecture.
People finally
Say this. The professor say this.
People finally began organizing into complex societies like the ones we have today.
Fantastic. So, well, the fact that he said at the end, like the ones we have today, well, of course, I think that that is a phrase that indicates to you that the professor considers that agriculture has been the cause or the reason why our society and a mother organization in human civilization is the way it is, right? And I think that it is clear that the correct response is that because of the last phrase he says, right? This
Listen
one?
again to part of the lecture.
Into complex societies like the ones we have. People finally began organizing into complex societies like the ones we have today.
Like the ones we have today. That tells you, right? Hey, he's saying that if it weren't because of agriculture, we wouldn't have the civilization that we have today, right? So he's trying to say that. I think it's very clear that he's trying to implicate that. What about the second one? He feels it took too long for complex modern societies to develop. I think this is not the correct answer, dear students, because, well, if you think about it, he never mentions anything about complexity. He didn't say, for example, it was very difficult to transition from agriculture until the revolution or until the industrial era. He never says anything about that. He doesn't comment on complexity. So remember, you always have to look for a justification, and the justification in the recording you listen to never speaks about complexity. So it cannot be that it's too complex. Third, he's emphasizing the role of specialized training in complex societies. Tempting, but nonetheless, again, is the recording mentioning something about training? Not at all, right? So maybe you think this is logical, this makes sense. And yes, certainly, training has been an incredible factor, very influential in our society nowadays. Nonetheless, the recording that we have listened to doesn't say anything about specialized training. Therefore, it's not a correct answer. And the fourth one, he's implying that modern laws about growing, so laws are not even mentioned, right? So forensic stuff that has to do with laws or enactments, not even mentioned. So of course, it's not a correct answer. Fantastic. So now that we have listened to that review and feedback, I hope that you have managed to check out and to see if your responses were correct, and to see as well if your criteria when responding is correct. For those of you who have not been able to respond, don't worry, we're going to go with a new lecture or conversation in this case, and you're going to be able to respond to this one, okay? So it's a lecture in history, well, in art history. So please let's listen to this one. And now take your notes, and we're going to comment on the responses later.
Listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
Last week, we talked about Impressionism, about its appreciation for the effect of light and the way it changes the characteristics of the subject of the painting. Today, we are going to cover pointillism, which is a branch of Impressionism. Now, pointillism, also known as neo-impressionism or divisionism, is a technique of painting using small points of primary colors to compose new shapes and hues. One of the most famous works using this technique is Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte by Georges Seurat. Notice how vivid and vibrant the colors in this picture are. There are more than 3 million dots painted onto the canvas in this painting, yet not a single one of them stands out on its own.
Is there a reason why they used so many primary colors when applying the pointillist technique?
Well, we learned last week that the Impressionists had been fascinated with the study of colors and light. I guess we could say Seurat took it to another level. He was not satisfied with the traditional method of mixing different colors on the palette, because he felt like the more you mix colors, the more they become, well, dull. He explored how the allocation of complementary or contrasting colors next to each other can be perceived in the eye as a third color from a distance. Now, what are other examples of such an optical illusion?
Mosaic art, images created by putting hundreds of little multicolored tiles together to make one big picture.
And tapestry, too. The drawings on tapestries are made of individual dots, not painted onto material.
Right. Then there are the TV and computer screens we see all around us. Today, we utilize the combination of vivid colors in most projection-type screens. But this was an innovative discovery in Seurat's time. Color theorists of the 19th century, such as Michel-Eugène Chevreul, argue that colors are affected by the color around them. For example, if red is placed next to blue, the blue will take on a greenish hue, because green is the opposite of red.
Excuse me, sir. I can understand why people refer to this technique as pointillism. The pictures are composed as points, or dots, rather than strokes. But why do some refer to this technique as divisionism?
Well, that's because Seurat attempted to divide the intended color into separate pixels of pure colors. The truth is, when Seurat introduced his technique, he referred to it as chromoluminism. Chromo as in color, and luminism as in light. It is ironic, actually, because the term pointillism, which we use more commonly, was initially coined by the older Impressionist artists to ridicule Seurat's work. Those with more respect referred to his technique as divisionism.
Why did people ridicule Seurat? The sheer scale of work involved in his paintings must have been awe-inspiring.
You might think so, but traditional Impressionists felt Seurat's approach to art was much too scientific and calculated, and that it lacked any attempt to put on the canvas the impression the artist gets from the scenery. Also, trying to divide colors instead of implementing the traditional method of mixing pigment on the palette may have been offensive to those like Claude Monet, whose work majorly relied on trying to replicate the hue of his objects as precisely as possible in this traditional method.
But Vincent van Gogh is famous for exclusively using very short strokes as well. One would think his work has some similarity to pointillism.
Ah, but you must remember the mixture of colors in his strokes. The colors being applied to the canvas, they weren't exclusively primary colors, but obviously had been pre-mixed. So, how do these techniques differ in their effects?
I sense more movement in Van Gogh's painting, more energy. Well, Seurat's work looks more static.
The blending of colors seems more linear and fluid in Van Gogh's work, while it looks like different hues are overlapping in Seurat's work.
Right. So, even if the strokes might be similarly small, the final piece will reflect light and color very differently. Had Seurat been more appreciated earlier, his greatest piece would not be resting at the Art Institute of Chicago today. The French still refer to Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte as the greatest French art outside France.
All right, there you are. Fantastic. Very interesting lecture, right, on art history. Now let us go with the questions. All right, I'm going to try to have the students who didn't help me before, Miguel and Alondra, The first two questions are going to be for you. So please, the first one for Miguel. So please, let us all start reading and responding the question now.
It will be C.
Right, C. Fantastic, thank you very much. There you are. Thank you very much, Miguel. Alondra, please, this is going to be for you. So please start reading and responding now.
Option A.
Option A, thank you very much, Alondra. There you are. Okay, so let's come back to the beginning. Please, Sergio, just Sergio, not Sergio Nogales, but just Sergio, help me with this one. Okay, Sergio, please, could you help me with this one?
Okay, A and C.
All right, A and C, thank you very much, Sergio. Raisa, please, this is going to be for you. Okay, so start reading and responding now.
Option B.
All right, option B, thank you very much. Fantastic, let's go with the next question. Camila, please, this is for you. Start now.
I think it's D.
B or D, excuse me, Camila?
D.
D, fantastic, thank you very much. There you are. All right. Wonderful, okay, so next one will be for Miguel again, please, Miguel Paulson. Okay, but you're gonna listen to this one. Oh, no, sorry, this is for the other timer. So please, let's listen to this recording of the audio for us to respond later.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
One of the most famous works using this technique is Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte by Georges Seurat. Notice how vivid and vibrant the colors in this picture are.
Why does the professor say this?
Notice how vivid and vibrant the colors in this picture are.
Okay, so please, Miguel, start now.
A.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Miguel. There you are. All right, thank you. Okay, fantastic. So the rest of you are going to help me with the other one. Okay, so don't worry. Let's see the correct responses. All right, let's come back. Okay, there we are. So what is the lecture mainly about? In this case, the lecture is mainly about the artistic style of pointillism. Now, what is this the correct answer? Because the emergence of Impressionism is actually not something that it is mentioned in the lecture. If you listen to it, it talks about a particular part of the Impressionism movement, that is to say, pointillism. But pointillism was something practiced by Impressionists. But in the lecture, it is never talked about very much profoundly or deeply about what Impressionism is. So therefore, this cannot be the correct answer, okay? Because Impressionism is just mentioned as that particular movement in which pointillism was born, but not something else, okay? So this cannot be the main idea. But nonetheless, the artistic style of pointillism is certainly the mainly discussed topic, because if you think about it, this is what unifies the lecture. How the professor starts talking about the style of this well, artistic movement, how it comes to talk about specific artists who practice this type of paintings or this type of art, as you know, the ones that he has mentioned, right? As this picture that we have seen on the screen, how he talks about other critics who certainly criticize this type of material because they consider it to be too scientific. You know, everything is just because the professor wants to discuss the artistic style of pointillism and all the controversy it brought with itself, right? So that is the reason why the correct answer is this one, because it unifies the entire lecture. It connects all the information mentioned there so that it doesn't become something separate, okay? Fantastic. The early opposition towards George Seurat is not actually as well very much mentioned, because it is just part of what it is said in the lecture, right? Yes, indeed, we are discussing how was this particular character very much opposed in his time, but nonetheless, that is not all we are talking in the lecture, or that is not all we are said in the lecture. We are actually said about many other things, right? The style, the techniques, the controversy, the contemporary use of this, but this is just something that is included, but not all. Next question. What is the male student's opinion of Seurat's work? He thinks Seurat deserves to be praised. If you think about this one, dear students, I think he said this, right? Because when the professor said that Seurat received a lot of criticism from other artists, he said, right? But shouldn't he be admired for the incredible technique he had and the beauty of his art? Remember, he said this, right? So given that he is actually disagreeing with these contemporary people in Seurat's times that somehow disliked his work, he is, of course, showing that in his opinion, Seurat deserved to be praised, right? If he's questioning the attitude of these people who did exactly the opposite to praising this particular artist, right? So that is the reason why this is the correct answer. Imagine or remember that in order to respond opinions questions or attitude questions, these are the ones that I taught you as attitude questions. You have to think, what is the intonation of the speaker? What word choice is the speaker having? And the word choice the speaker is having in this case is words that are somehow questioning why is it that these people in ancient times disliked Seurat's work, even when he considers that he should be praised because of the beauty of these works, right? And that is the correct answer. But for example, the first one, he thinks Seurat colors mix fluidly. Well, I mean, maybe this is something that certainly somebody mentioned about Seurat, but the opinion of the male students, notice that here there were two different students, a male and female student. I think it was the female student who said that she considered that Seurat had a very fluid technique with mixed colors, but it wasn't the male student who said this. So remember that the question is asking about the male students, and the male's intervention in this conversation was that he said, you know, guys, I think that why didn't they admire him, or why did they criticize him if he deserved to be well regarded, right? Let's go. What other examples of the optical illusion effect pointillism relies on? I think this was very easy, right? Mosaic art and tapestry. I think that both options were very clear because the author also mentions it's tremendously clear, right? Let's continue. What can be inferred about how pointillism was evaluated while Seurat was alive? Contemporary artists did not appreciate pointillism. Fantastic. This is very good, dear students. What can be inferred about how pointillism was evaluated while Seurat was alive? Well, the entire lecture says that nobody, well, not nobody, but many people criticized him, right? Because people say that he was too scientific, he was too centered on the technical parts of color blending, and he didn't enjoy his art, and he didn't put soul and heart, let's say, and spirit to this art that for other people had become something more of an expression, when for Seurat, it was more about the technique and the scientific implications of this, or well, of different phenomena in painting, right? So yes, contemporary artists, that is to say, artists from that time, did not appreciate pointillism. I think this was very clear because the entire lecture gives us that suggestion that there were people who criticized his artist, even when he was a very good painter, and that he is regarded as such nowadays, right? It cannot be the first one, for example, many impressionists thought pointillism was not scientific, because this is actually the contrary in the lecture, right? That impressionists did believe that pointillism was too scientific, that it centered too much on scientific applications of data into art. So as I say, this is confusing the information. And Americans value pointillism more than the French. Nothing is discussed in the question about this fact. It is not said if Americans appreciated this more, although it is mentioned that some paintings of this time are placed in America. It doesn't mean that it is more value in America just because the painting is in America instead of France, right? So this cannot be a correct answer because the passage doesn't suggest to you anything about American desire or like for this type of painting. And Seurat quickly rose to fame after his first piece. Again, nothing in the passage suggests you this. And remember that inference must always be done by following the information you have, right? Not by your own opinion or external information, but always applying the information that the context and the lecture has given you. The lecture has told you that people in his time did not like his art, but nothing tells you if he was famous or not right after he published his first piece. Nothing in the lecture is discussing that particular point. Therefore, this cannot be an inference, right? Because you have to infer about the information you have and not something external or what you consider to be logical, but from the information, out of the information. Okay. Number 5. According to the professor, how is Sunday afternoon on the island of Le Grand Jeté regarded by the French state as a significant cultural achievement that is unfortunately distant from its origin? I think this is very clear when he says, right, that the French believe that this is the greatest French history out of France, right? And this means, of course, a significant cultural achievement that is unfortunately distant from its origin, right? Because as more noteworthy than other French works that have not left their homeland, nothing is mentioned about a comparison. Notice the professor never compares, for example, the paintings that are still in France with this one that is not actually in France but in America. He never compares the quality of this particular paintings, but the only thing he comments on is the fact that this painting that should be in France because it's a French painting is actually in America. And French, of course, are sad and they are lamenting that particular situation because they would like it to be in France, of course, right? But nothing is mentioned about the quality of these paintings when compared each other. As rightfully theirs is stolen by the Art Institute of Chicago, well, again, nothing in the passage claims that it was stolen, right? The only thing that it indicates is that it is in America, but not how it arrived in America. If it was stolen or doesn't say anything about that, right? It just mentions that it is in America. And as well as the underappreciated word that must be evaluated, well, I think this is not true, right? It never mentions about if it was appreciated or if it was underestimated. Final question. Why does the professor say this? To emphasize how pointillism affects the appearance of colors. And what was the audio?
Listen again.
How vivid and vibrant the colors in this picture are.
Yes, certainly. To emphasize how pointillism affects the appearance of colors is the correct answer because, well, he is pointing out his students towards the fact that this technique and the color and the traces and the strokes in this particular painting is quite interesting and striking, right? So he's emphasizing how pointillism affects the appearance of colors. Two, or the second option, to draw attention to the selection of colors in the artwork, cannot be the correct answer. Well, because the professor, remember what he says. Let's see again.
Listen how vivid and vibrant the colors in this picture are.
Right, vivid and vibrant the colors in this picture are, right? So he's basically emphasizing on the appearance of the colors instead of the selection, right? He's not mentioning, for example, notice how he used just black colors, or how he used just light colors, and not, for example, I don't know, combinations or blendings. No, he's not discussing that, the selection, what he chose to paint. No, he's discussing how this affects the picture, what effect does it produce in the picture that, in this case, I think it was Manet who painted this. And the third one, to suggest that the mentioned work is the best piece Seurat completed, again, is not what the professor says, right? He's not talking about which one is his favorite or which one is considered the most beautiful and fantastic piece of art that he created. And the fourth one, to draw similarities to other Impressionist artist pieces, is not correct. It simply doesn't mention, right? Fantastic. Let's go with the last exercise before we finish the class. This time is going to be a conversation. Let me just skip this one. We're going to get into the conversation because it's more, it's shorter, and I think it's necessary for us to also practice conversations that we have not seen yet, but just lectures. So let me skip this until the part that we arrive to conversation. This one, no, no, and let's go with this one. Okay, come on, ancient history again. So sorry. I'm gonna have to continue skipping until we find the one that is a conversation. No. Okay, finally, here we are. Well, so sorry. Let's go with here, awesome practice, listening, conversation, quiz one. Let's go. Let us listen to this conversation. Take your notes, okay?
Listen to a conversation between a student and her professor.
Colleen, thanks for coming to see me about your paper. So, the assignment was to compare and contrast any two specific characters. I mean, any two specific archetypes that appeared in the folklore and myths you were assigned this semester.
Right. An archetype is basically just a synonym for character, right?
Well, not exactly. I mean, folklorists use the term archetype to describe certain kinds of characters, but not just any kind. Archetypes are universalizing stereotypical personalities that are commonly found across multiple stories and even multiple civilizations at a time.
Right. I see.
But let's get to the point. What I wanted to say was, the paper you emailed me was a bit problematic, and I think you should redo it.
Really? I was actually really proud of it.
Your thesis that folklore and mythology collections, that anthologies of fairy tales like the one I assigned on the syllabus should be revised for children so that stories will include more powerful female characters. Well, it was an interesting thesis, I'll give you that, but it won't cut it for this assignment.
Well, the way I see it, we have hundreds of versions of these folk tales. But which ones have survived? All the traditional stories in most anthologies depict the girls as passive at best and stupid at worst.
Okay, I understand, but...
Hear me out. Young women today are looking for role models. We need stories with heroines who validate our dreams, our aspirations. That's really the heart of what I was getting at in the paper. I think it's more important to focus on untraditional heroines.
Well said. The issue isn't that I disagree with you, Colleen. Actually, you made some really insightful points in the paper. The problem is, well, you totally neglected the assignment.
Didn't I compare Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid with the Grimm brothers' Snow White?
Not exactly. Your paper asserted that their core similarity was that they embodied old-fashioned characteristics and that the stories about them shouldn't have been included in the anthology or others like it in the first place.
You saw where I was coming from, right? Like, my grandmother used to read me Irish folk tales, and the heroines showed courage through their intelligence and quick-wittedness. Why can't films and anthologies focus on stories like that?
You have a point, but you were supposed to compare the two characters in meaningful ways, showing specific similarities and differences between archetypes. The bulk of your paper wasn't about archetypes at all.
But I talked about similarities between common depictions of traditional characters, right?
Look, I would have been open to an approach in which you highlighted common characteristics like passivity and self-sacrifice and showed why these kinds of values can convey potentially bad messages for girls. But even in that situation, the core of the paper, the meat of the essay would still have to be about the texts themselves.
Okay.
Still, I'm letting you redo the paper instead of grading it now, because I appreciate the point that you were trying to make. Does that seem fair?
Yes, definitely. But I'm still not entirely sure how to revise this.
Review the two texts and in the paper, show where the characters are similar and different from one another using specific examples and quotes. If you want to discuss how their specific features are harmful to feminism, be my guest, but be sure to keep it in the context relevant to the assignment. I'm sure you'll bring a fascinating perspective to the table.
All right, there you are. Fantastic. So let us go with the questions, okay? Here we go, question number 1. So this one is going to be for Alondra. So please, Alondra, start reading and responding now. Yes, Alondra?
Option 3.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. The second one is going to be for Sergio. Sergio, please, could you help me with this one? Start now.
Option B.
Yes, option B. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sergio. There you are. Just in time. Lucia, this is yours. Okay, Lucia?
I think that the answer is A, the first choice.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Fabiana, this is yours.
I think it's D.
D. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fabiana. There you are. And finally, last one for. Okay. Oh, let us listen to this one.
Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
The issue isn't that I disagree with you, Colleen. Actually, you made some really insightful points in the paper. The problem is, well, you totally neglected the assignment.
Why does the professor say this?
The issue isn't that I disagree with you, Colleen.
All right, fantastic. This one goes for Camila. Please, Camila.
I think it's A.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Camila. There we are. Okay, so that's all for this conversation. As you remember, there are just 5 questions per conversation when compared to the 6 ones in the lectures. Okay, so let's see the correct answers. So why does a student visit the professor? To discuss a problem with her paper's topic of focus, all right? Now, of course, if you think about it, yes, certainly this is the correct answer because when she goes to talk with the professor, her topic for the paper is already decided, right? What the professor questions and basically complains about is that she didn't fulfill with the topic or the thing that she had been assigned to, right? So it is not that she goes to discuss what is going to be the topic for her semester term paper because the topic is already settled. The point is that she goes to discuss a problem with her paper's topic of focus that was, as I say, already determined, okay? So it cannot be the third one, but the fourth one is certainly the correct one. And the second one, to discuss her ideas about heroines in folk tales, is not true because she doesn't go in order to do that. But actually, the professor says that that was particularly the point that was wrong in her paper, right? So let's continue. It's number 2. According to the professor, what is an archetype? A type of very commonly repeated character across multiple retellings, right? There is a particular part in which the professor says this, right? That an archetype is, a character that is repeated into different stories, right? And not just one particular culture has a story that presents a character very similar to this one, so that they basically fall down into a category, and that is what an archetype is, right? So I think there's no need to clarify this one because in this type of question, that is the detailed question, the only thing you need to do is to remember, right, what the passage said and to apply that into the response. And in this case, a universalizing story able to be understood by many cultures, although maybe that it seems rational, that maybe seems to be correct as a definition for this one out of the context or out of this information or out of this lecture. In the lecture, the definition that the professor gives is the third one, not the second one, okay? So as I say, don't let good definitions that could be certain and true externally guide you in order to respond, but what should guide you and be leading you in order to respond correctly is the information presented in the passage. And the passage says the third definition, not the second one that in my opinion could be even better, but certainly here you have what the professor says, and that is what you have to think about, okay? A kind of a story that may convey socially outdated messages. Not at all. The professor never suggests such an hypothesis that they are talking about things that are not relevant today, or a character depicted with traditionally heroic qualities. this would be basically a hero, right? Or that would be a different character, but not an archetype, right? So this is not true. Third, what is the female student's attitude toward the Irish folk tales she heard from her grandmother? They feature female characters who could serve as positive role models, right? Certainly, she considers this to be true because, well, she particularly says this at some point in her conversation with the professor, right? That she considered these characters demonstrate how women had value in society in different contexts, even during ancient times, especially in the Irish culture, right? How this affects positively to the objective and desire of feminism. So this can be the correct answer. Nonetheless, they included the themes that were harmful to feminism is not something that she particularly claims, right? This is actually something that the professor, I think, suggests that she could discuss things that are harmful to feminism. I think that that is something that he mentioned at the end, but this is not what she says, right? It's different because what the professor suggests is different to the female attitude towards the Irish folk tales, right? And the way and the word choice she gives to this topic, I think that is very clear that the correct answer is the fourth one, right? So remember, intonation and word choice. And also her intonation was very much thoughtful when she discussed this topic. And I think that demonstrates, right, that she considered this could be a positive topic for models today. Fourth one, what will the student probably do next? Well, she will rewrite the paper following directions more assiduously. This is exactly what the professor counsels or recommends her to do next, right? Read this, compare your characters, and please never mention anything out of the context of the assignment I'm giving you, right? So this is exactly what she will do, right? I think there's no reason to doubt with this one. And now, this one was also correct. Why does the professor say this?
Listen again to part of the
The issue isn't that I disagree with you, Colleen.
Right? So he wants to refocus their discussion on the specific problem with the essay, right? So he's saying that, well, I like this part, the student, right? Because I think the student was confused at the beginning, thinking that there was a particular part that the professor didn't like, when it was another part, the one that he didn't enjoy, right? So he's saying, I actually like this about your paper. So now let us discuss what I am actually disagreeing with and what I consider to be wrong so that you correct it later. So in this case, as I said, refocusing or redirecting the discussion, the conversation to the specific problem with the essay that he wants to comment with his student, right? I think that is the correct answer. Or he wants to gently suggest that Colleen might be overstating the problem with folk tales. It's not what he says in this super short sentence. He wants to show the most important issue is the student's failure to submit her essay, and not at all, right? They never discussed it that she had some problem with the platform or something. She never said that she had some trouble submitting the homework, or he wants to change the subject because he does in fact disagree with the student. Actually the opposite, right? Because he says that he likes that part, not that he disagrees with it. Fantastic. Is there any question to your students about the exercises today? Anything that I could clarify, that I could help you with?
For me, I think that I have to practice.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much, Lucia. Yes, certainly. We have to practice more. Tomorrow we're going to do that. And I'm going to give you not only homework, but material tomorrow for you to practice the entire weekend. So don't worry about that, okay? Any other question to your students? Actually, I want to send more material right now. Look at your WhatsApp group. Here I'm giving you free material, okay, for you to practice in your free time. So please feel free to download and to use this material, okay? And I'm going to send more, as I say, once you practice with me tomorrow, okay? I have actually more things here. But yeah, I'm gonna send everything, okay, tomorrow. This is just for today's practice. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the class here, all right? Please, your students, help me with the traditional poll as I call out your names and I fill the list for you to receive your certificate, okay? You know that you help me a lot doing this positively, all right? So please help me with that. Look at your screen and listen to your name. Sheets of paper. Okay, so it's here present, Raisa Guzman Bolivia.
Yes, I am here.
Thank you very much, Raisa. Okay, what about Lucia Gabriela?
Present.
Thank you very much, Lucia. What about Sergio Andrés Heredia? He was here, I know he was here. Rafael Ezequiel? Rafa was not here. And now, Ramirez Camila?
Here.
Thank you very much, Camila. What about Mayra Alejandra? Okay, Salguero Fabiana?
Present.
Thank you very much, Fabiana. What about Quiroga Adriana? Okay, Zúñiga Sergio?
Present.
Thank you very much. What about Alondra Lisette?
Present.
Thank you very much, Alondra. What about Jose Miguel Quiroga?
Present.
Thank you very much, Jose Miguel. What about Quesada Anaí Stefania? Jorge Alberto Benítez?
Here, present.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Fantastic. Thank you very much, dear students. I think it has been a pleasure to be with you tonight. And we have had, I think, a very good time practicing. Tomorrow, more material. Use the one that I sent right now to the WhatsApp group. And tomorrow, I'm going to give you more, okay? Have a wonderful night. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later.